On a Saturday afternoon in June, in front of 200 witnesses, a bride stood at the altar and refused to kiss her husband. The minister's words hung in the air like a thunderclap. "You may now kiss the bride." But she stepped back. Her hands trembled as she whispered 4 words that would shatter 3 families forever. "I know the truth." What happened in that church on what should have been the happiest day of her life would expose a betrayal so calculated, so deliberate, that even strangers who heard the story couldn't believe someone could be that heartless. This is not a story about cold feet. This is not about second thoughts or wedding day jitters. This is about a woman who walked down an aisle believing she was marrying the love of her life, only to discover in the final moments before saying "I do" that everything she thought she knew was a carefully constructed lie. The text message she received 30 minutes before the ceremony would reveal an affair that had been going on for 18 months. But it wasn't just the affair. It was who he was cheating with. It was the conversations she would read. It was the realization that while she was planning their future, he was planning his exit. And it was the fact that he was willing to stand there, look her in the eyes, and lie through an entire wedding ceremony. By the time you hear what Emily Carter discovered in that bridal suite, you'll understand why she couldn't bring herself to touch him. This is the story of how one text message unraveled years of deception and why sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from everything you thought you wanted. Emily Carter was 32 years old, a 3rd-grade teacher in a suburb outside of Richmond, Virginia. She had been with Daniel Brooks for 5.5 years. They met at a mutual friend's barbecue in the summer of 2019. He was a project manager at a tech company, well-liked in their community, the kind of guy who remembered your birthday and always picked up the check at dinner. Everyone said they were perfect together. Her parents adored him. His family welcomed her with open arms. They bought a house together 2 years into the relationship. They talked about kids, about growing old together, about building a life. And then in February of the previous year, he proposed on a beach in the Outer Banks with a ring he had been saving for 6 months to buy. The wedding was set for June 15th. Everything was planned down to the last detail. The flowers, the music, the menu. Emily had dreamed about this day since she was a little girl. So what happened? What could possibly make a woman who loved someone enough to plan a wedding with them refuse to kiss them at the altar? What did Emily discover that made her stop her own wedding in front of everyone she knew? And how had Daniel managed to hide something so devastating for so long? To understand what happened that day, you have to understand who Emily was. She wasn't impulsive. She wasn't dramatic. She was the friend people called when they needed steady advice. She was the teacher parents requested for their children because she was patient and kind. She had been hurt before in her 20s by a boyfriend who cheated on her with a coworker. That betrayal had left scars. It made her cautious. It made her pay attention to red flags. And when she met Daniel, she thought she had finally found someone who was different. Someone honest. Someone safe. Her best friend Rachel, who had known her since college, would later say that Emily had never been happier than she was with Daniel. She seemed lighter. More at peace. She talked about their future with a certainty that Rachel had never heard in her voice before. Emily's parents, particularly her father Michael, had been protective of her after the previous relationship ended badly. But even he approved of Daniel. "He's a good man," Michael told his wife one evening after Daniel had come over for dinner. "He treats her right. That's all we can ask for." Emily herself believed she had found her person. There were moments, small moments, when she felt a flicker of something. Times when Daniel's phone would buzz and he would glance at it and then put it face down without explaining. Times when he would say he was working late but wouldn't have much to say about his day. But she pushed those thoughts away. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself that her past was making her see problems that weren't there. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. Daniel Brooks presented himself as exactly the kind of man any woman would want to marry. He was 34, successful in his career, polite to waiters, generous with friends. He coached a youth soccer team on weekends. He helped his elderly neighbor with yard work without being asked. At their engagement party, he gave a toast that made half the room tear up. He talked about how Emily made him want to be a better person. How she was his best friend. How he couldn't wait to spend the rest of his life with her. People who knew them as a couple would describe them as solid. Stable. The kind of relationship that made single people hopeful and married people nostalgic. But there were people who weren't entirely convinced. Daniel's co-worker Marcus mentioned once to a mutual friend that Daniel seemed to have a lot of private phone calls. That he would sometimes leave the office and take calls in his car. Marcus didn't think much of it at the time. People are entitled to privacy. But looking back after everything came out, he wondered if he should have said something. Daniel's sister Jennifer would later admit that she had noticed her brother seemed distracted in the months before the wedding. He would zone out during family dinners. He seemed stressed in a way that didn't match someone who was excited about getting married. But when she asked if he was okay, he would brush it off. Wedding planning stress, he would say. You know how it is. Emily and Daniel's relationship looked picture perfect from the outside. They posted photos on social media. They went on weekend trips. They hosted dinner parties. They argued sometimes, like any couple, but never about anything that seemed serious. Never about anything that would make you think the relationship was in trouble. The proposal had been romantic. Daniel had planned it carefully, taking her to the place where they had their first real conversation at that barbecue 5 years earlier. He had photos printed of their relationship over the years. He had a playlist of songs that meant something to them. When he got down on one knee and asked her to marry him, Emily said yes before he even finished the question. The wedding planning process had its stressful moments. Emily wanted a small wedding. Daniel's mother wanted something bigger. They compromised. Emily wanted a live band. Budget constraints meant they went with a DJ. Small disagreements, normal disagreements. But there was one argument that stuck with Rachel, Emily's best friend. 3 days before the wedding, Rachel had stopped by Emily's house to drop off some decorations. She found Emily in tears. Daniel had snapped at her over something small, something about the seating chart, and it had escalated into a bigger fight. He's been so distant lately, Emily had told Rachel. I feel like I'm planning this wedding by myself. Rachel had hugged her and told her it was just pre-wedding stress. That all couples go through it. But later, Rachel would wonder if Emily's instincts were trying to tell her something even then. The morning of June 15th started the way wedding mornings are supposed to start. Emily woke up in a hotel room with her bridesmaids. They ordered room service. They drank mimosas. The hair and makeup artist arrived at 8 in the morning. Emily sat in the chair in her robe, watching herself transform in the mirror while her friends laughed and told stories around her. Her mother came in around 10 with the dress. It was a simple A-line gown with lace sleeves, exactly what Emily had imagined. When she put it on and her mother zipped it up, She looked at herself in the mirror and for a moment, everything felt right. She looked like a bride. She looked happy. "This is really happening," she said to Rachel. "I'm getting married today." Rachel hugged her carefully, trying not to mess up the makeup. "You're going to have the most beautiful day," she said. By 11 in the morning, the bridal suite was a flurry of activity. Bridesmaids were getting dressed. The photographer was taking candid shots. Emily's mother was crying happy tears. Everything was on schedule. The ceremony was set for 1 o'clock. At around 11:30, Emily's phone buzzed. She was standing by the window, looking out at the garden where the ceremony would take place. She picked up her phone absently, expecting maybe a good luck text from a friend. What she saw instead made her blood run cold. It was a message from a number she didn't recognize. The message contained no words. Just a screenshot. And then another. And then another. And then a video file. Emily's hands started shaking. She sat down heavily on the couch. Rachel noticed immediately. What's wrong?" Emily couldn't speak. She just held out the phone. And Rachel, looking at the screen, felt her stomach drop. The screenshots were text messages between Daniel and someone saved in his phone as J. The messages went back 18 months. They weren't ambiguous. They weren't friendly. They were explicit. They were intimate. They were the kind of messages you send to someone you're in a relationship with. But it wasn't just the affair that made Emily's world collapse. It was what they were saying about her. There were messages where Daniel called Emily controlling. Where he called their relationship suffocating. Where he said he was only going through with the wedding because it was too late to back out. Because calling it off would be too complicated. Because he didn't want to deal with the fallout. The video file was worse. It was a recording of Daniel talking to this person, someone Emily couldn't see but could hear. The conversation was from 2 nights earlier. 2 nights before their wedding. And in this recording, Daniel said the words that would haunt Emily forever. "I don't love her anymore. I haven't for a while. But I can't walk away now. Too many people are involved. Too much money has been spent. I'll just get through the wedding and figure it out after." Figure it out after. As if their marriage was a problem to be solved later. As if Emily was an inconvenience rather than a person he was making vows to. Rachel read the messages and watched the video with Emily. The room around them had gone quiet. The other bridesmaids had noticed something was wrong. Emily's mother stepped closer. "Emily, what happened?" Emily looked up at her mother, and the expression on her face was something her mother had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was a kind of hollow devastation. "He doesn't love me," Emily said quietly. "He's been cheating. And he's only marrying me because it's easier than calling it off." The room erupted in chaos. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Emily's mother grabbed the phone and read the messages herself. Her face went from confusion to rage in seconds. She looked like she wanted to break something. "We're calling this off," she said. "Right now. We're canceling it." But Emily just sat there, staring at nothing. The makeup artist had quietly left the room. The photographer had stopped taking pictures. The bridesmaids were frozen, not knowing what to do or say. Rachel knelt down in front of Emily. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "This is your call. Whatever you decide, we're with you." Emily's mind was racing. There were 200 people downstairs. Her father had paid for this wedding. The vendors were set up. The food was prepared. The minister was waiting. Daniel was probably in his suite getting ready, putting on his tuxedo, practicing his vows, completely unaware that his lies had just been exposed. For a moment, Emily imagined calling it off. She imagined walking out of the hotel, getting in a car, and just disappearing. But then something else took over. Something harder. "Why should I be the one who's embarrassed?" she said. "Why should I be the one who has to explain to everyone why there's no wedding? He did this. He lied. He cheated. He was going to stand up there and make promises he had no intention of keeping." Rachel and Emily's mother exchanged a glance. Emily stood up. Her legs felt unsteady but her voice was firm. "I'm going down there," she said. "I'm walking down that aisle. And when he tries to kiss me, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man he is." Her mother started to protest, started to say that she didn't have to do this, that they could just cancel everything. But Emily cut her off. "Yes, I do," she said. "Because if I don't, he gets to control the narrative. He gets to tell people whatever story he wants about why the wedding didn't happen. This way, everyone will know the truth." At 1 o'clock, the music started. The bridesmaids walked down the aisle one by one, their smiles practiced and perfect even though they knew what was coming. The guests stood. They turned to watch for the bride. And then Emily appeared at the end of the aisle on her father's arm. She looked beautiful. Her dress was perfect. Her makeup had been touched up after she had cried. No one in that room had any idea that anything was wrong. Daniel stood at the altar watching her walk toward him. He smiled. He looked nervous in the way grooms are supposed to be nervous. Happy nervous. Excited nervous. He had no idea what was about to happen. Emily's father Michael could feel his daughter trembling as they walked. He leaned close and whispered, "Are you sure about this?" She nodded. "I have to," she whispered back. When they reached the altar, Michael kissed Emily on the cheek and then shook Daniel's hand. "Take care of her," he said, the traditional words. Daniel nodded. "I will," he said. It was a lie. Emily stepped up next to Daniel. He reached for her hand and she let him take it, even though her skin crawled at his touch. The minister began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The traditional words. The familiar rhythm. Daniel was looking at Emily like she was the only person in the room. Like he meant every moment of this. And maybe that was the worst part. How good he was at pretending. How easily the lies came to him. The ceremony continued. The readings. The vows. Daniel said his vows first. He talked about how Emily was his best friend. How she made him laugh. How he promised to love her and cherish her for the rest of his life. Some people in the crowd were crying. Happy tears. Emily's vows were shorter. She had written them weeks ago, words about love and partnership and forever. But standing there, knowing what she knew, she couldn't say them. She looked at Daniel and said simply, "I thought I knew who you were. I thought you loved me. I was wrong." Daniel's smile faltered. "What?" The minister looked confused. Emily?" But Emily just shook her head. The minister, sensing something was very wrong but not knowing what to do, continued to the next part of the ceremony. "If anyone has any objections to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace." The traditional pause. No one ever actually objects at weddings. It's just a formality. But this time, Emily spoke. "I object," she said clearly. The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Daniel stared at her. "Emily, what are you doing?" Emily pulled her hand out of his. She reached into the small bouquet she was holding and pulled out her phone. She had tucked it in there before walking down the aisle. She pulled up the screenshots and held the phone out to Daniel. "I'm objecting to marrying a man who's been cheating on me for 18 months, she said loud enough for the first few rows to hear. "A man who told someone 2 days ago that he doesn't love me anymore but is only going through with this wedding because it's too convenient to back out now." Daniel's face went white. "Where did you get that?" "That's private." "Private?" Emily's voice was shaking now but she didn't stop. "You've been lying to me for over a year. You've been sleeping with someone else. You were going to marry me knowing you didn't want to be with me. And you're worried about privacy?" The guests were starting to murmur. People were leaning forward trying to hear what was happening. Daniel tried to grab her arm. "Emily, can we please talk about this somewhere else? This isn't the place." Emily stepped back. "No. This is exactly the place. Because these people," Emily gestured to the crowd, "they all came here today to watch us promise to love each other. They deserve to know that you were going to stand here and lie. That you've been lying this whole time." Daniel's mother stood up from her seat in the front row. "What is going on?" Emily turned to her. "Ask your son. Ask him about the messages on his phone. Ask him about the person he's been seeing behind my back. Ask him why he told them 2 days ago that he was only marrying me because it was easier than calling off the wedding." Daniel tried one more time to de-escalate. His voice dropped, pleading. "Emily, please. We can talk about this. Just not here. Not like this." But Emily was done protecting him. She turned to face the guests. "I received some messages this morning," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent room. "Messages that showed me my fiancé has been having an affair. Messages that showed me he doesn't actually want to marry me. He was just going to go through with it because, quote, it's too late to back out now." The room erupted. Gasps. Whispers. Daniel's best man stepped forward looking completely lost. "Dude, is this true?" Daniel didn't answer. His jaw was clenched. His hands were in fists at his sides. The minister cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps we should take a break. Perhaps the couple needs some time." Emily shook her head. "There is no couple. There's not going to be a wedding." She pulled off her engagement ring and held it out to Daniel. He didn't take it, so she dropped it at his feet. Then she turned to the guests again. "I'm sorry you all came here for nothing," she said. "I'm sorry you wasted your time. But I'm not sorry I didn't marry him." Then she picked up her dress and walked back down the aisle. The same aisle she had walked down 20 minutes earlier as a bride. Now she was walking back up it as a woman who had just blown up her own wedding. The bridesmaids followed her. Then Emily's parents. The guests were still sitting there in shocked silence. Daniel stood at the altar alone. His mother was crying. His father looked furious. And then slowly, people started to get up and leave. Some of them were texting frantically, already spreading the story. Some of them just looked sad. Like they had witnessed something they wished they hadn't. Within 15 minutes, the ceremony space was empty except for Daniel, his family, and a few confused vendors. If this hooked you already, don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop a comment because what happens next will absolutely shatter your expectations. Emily made it to the bridal suite before she collapsed. Not physically collapsed, but emotionally. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation drained out of her all at once and she sat on the couch shaking. Rachel sat next to her and put an arm around her shoulders. Her mother was on the phone with the hotel, trying to figure out what to do about the reception they had planned. Her father was downstairs, quietly telling the guests who were lingering that there would be no reception, that Emily was okay, that they appreciated everyone coming. The question everyone wanted to know was who sent Emily the messages. Who knew about Daniel's affair and why did they choose to expose it on the wedding day? That answer would come about an hour later when Emily finally looked at her phone again. There was a message from the same unknown number. "I'm sorry I had to tell you this way. I'm sorry I waited until today. But I couldn't let you marry him without knowing the truth." The message was signed with just a first name. Jessica. Emily stared at the name. She didn't personally know anyone named Jessica. But as it turned out, Jessica was Daniel's co-worker. The woman he had been having the affair with. And according to the messages she sent after that initial one, she had been trying to convince Daniel to call off the wedding for months. She had believed him when he said he was going to break up with Emily. She had believed him when he said he just needed to find the right time. But as the wedding got closer and Daniel kept making excuses, Jessica realized he had been lying to her too. He was never going to leave Emily. He was going to marry Emily and keep Jessica as a secret on the side. When Jessica confronted him about it 2 days before the wedding, Daniel had told her flat out that he couldn't cancel now. It would be too messy. Too expensive. Too embarrassing. He suggested they just continue as they had been. And that was when Jessica decided Emily deserved to know the truth. What Emily didn't know yet was that the affair with Jessica wasn't the only secret Daniel had been keeping. Over the next several days as she started to piece together the truth with help from people who had been too afraid to tell her before, a more complex picture emerged. Jessica had been the current affair. But there had been others before her. A woman named Michelle who Daniel had been seeing during the first year of his relationship with Emily. A woman named Amanda who he had dated briefly during a period when Emily thought they were working through a rough patch. Daniel had a pattern. He was charming. He made women feel special. He made promises. And then when things got complicated or when the woman started wanting more than he was willing to give, he would either ghost them or gaslight them into thinking they were being unreasonable. Emily's friend Marcus, Daniel's co-worker, finally came forward with information he had been sitting on for months. He had seen Daniel with Jessica at a restaurant 6 months earlier. They had been holding hands. Laughing. Looking very much like a couple. Marcus had wrestled with whether to tell Emily. He didn't know her that well. He wasn't sure if she would believe him. He worried it would come across like he was causing trouble. So he had stayed silent. And now he felt terrible. "I should have said something," he told Emily when he reached out to her after the wedding. "I'm so sorry. I thought about it 100 times. I just didn't know how." Emily didn't blame him. She knew how hard it was to be the person delivering that kind of news. She knew how easy it was to convince yourself it wasn't your place. What hurt more than the affairs themselves was the realization that Daniel had never intended to be faithful to her. That from the very beginning of their relationship, he had been looking for something else. That she had never been enough for him and probably never could have been. The days after the wedding were brutal. Emily had to return gifts. She had to cancel the honeymoon they had planned to Hawaii. She had to tell her extended family members who hadn't been at the wedding what had happened. She had to deal with the gossip, the stares, the well-meaning but exhausting questions from people who wanted to know how she was doing. She cried. She barely ate. She couldn't sleep. Rachel moved into her house for a week because Emily's parents were worried about her being alone. Some people were supportive. They told Emily she was brave. That she had done the right thing. That she had saved herself from a terrible marriage. But there were others who questioned her decision. Who said she should have handled it privately? Who said she had embarrassed Daniel unnecessarily? Who suggested that maybe the affair was a mistake and she should have given him a chance to explain? Those comments hurt almost as much as the betrayal itself. The idea that she owed Daniel anything after what he had done. The idea that exposing his lies was somehow worse than him telling them in the first place. Daniel tried to contact her. He sent texts that Emily deleted without reading. He sent emails that went straight to spam. He called from different numbers that she blocked one by one. He even showed up at her house once, but Emily's father was there and told him in no uncertain terms to leave and not come back. Daniel's family had a different response. His mother called Emily selfish. She said Emily had humiliated their family. She said that whatever problems Daniel and Emily had should have been worked out in private. His sister Jennifer was more sympathetic but still distant. She sent Emily a message saying she was sorry for what Daniel had done but that she couldn't take sides because he was her brother. Emily understood, but it still stung. These were people she had thought would be her family. People she had shared holidays with. And now they were gone. 3 weeks after the wedding that never was, Emily received a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, thinking it might be Daniel trying a new tactic. But something made her pick up. The voice on the other end was female, unfamiliar, nervous. "Is this Emily Carter?" "Yes," Emily said cautiously. "My name is Stephanie," the woman said. "I'm Daniel's ex-girlfriend from about 7 years ago. I heard what happened at your wedding and I felt like I needed to call you." Emily sat down. She had no idea what to expect. Stephanie explained that she had dated Daniel for 2 years in their mid-20s. The relationship had ended badly. Daniel had cheated on her, lied about it for months, and when she finally caught him, he had made her feel like she was crazy for being upset. He told everyone she was unstable. That she was obsessive. That the breakup was her fault. "I believed for years that I was the problem," Stephanie said. "That I had driven him to cheat because I was too needy or too jealous. It wasn't until I heard about what happened to you that I realized he does this. This is who he is." Stephanie had been at therapy for years working through the damage that relationship had caused. She had finally gotten to a place where she felt healthy and whole. And then she saw Emily's story circulating on social media and recognized Daniel's name. "I wanted you to know that you're not alone," Stephanie said. "I wanted you to know that what he did to you, he's done before. It's not about you being not enough. It's about him being broken in some fundamental way." Emily cried on the phone with this stranger who understood her pain in a way few others could. They talked for over an hour. And by the end of the call, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Relief. Not happiness, not yet. But a kind of validation that what she had experienced was real and not her fault. If you're still here, subscribe, because stories like this only work when people stay. It's been 14 months since that day at the altar. Emily is still processing everything that happened. She's been in therapy, working through the betrayal, the humiliation, the grief of losing not just a relationship but an entire future she had imagined. She moved out of the house she and Daniel had shared. She changed her phone number. She blocked him and his family on all social media. She created space to heal. Some days are harder than others. She still has moments where she wonders if she did the right thing. If she should have handled it differently. If she overreacted. But then she remembers the messages. The video. The cold calculation in Daniel's voice when he said he was only marrying her because backing out would be inconvenient. And she knows she made the right choice. Emily has also connected with Jessica, the woman Daniel was having the affair with. They met for coffee about 6 months ago. It was awkward at first. Jessica apologized profusely for her role in the affair, even though Emily had already come to understand that Jessica had been lied to as well. They're not friends exactly. But there's an understanding between them. A shared recognition that they were both victims of the same person's deception. Daniel, from what Emily has heard through mutual acquaintances, has moved to another state. He's dating someone new. Emily wonders sometimes if he's told this new woman about what happened. If he's spun some story where he's the victim. If he's learned anything or if he's just repeating the same patterns with someone else. She'll probably never know. And increasingly, she's okay with that. What happened to Emily is something no one should have to go through. But in the aftermath, she's discovered strength she didn't know she had. She's learned that she can survive humiliation and heartbreak. That she can walk away from something she wanted desperately when she realizes it's built on lies. That she deserves better than someone who sees her as a convenience rather than a partner. Emily's story raises questions that many of us would rather not think about. How well do we really know the people we love? How many red flags do we ignore because we want so badly to believe in someone? How often do we choose comfort over truth because the truth is too painful? If you had been in Emily's position, if you had received those messages an hour before your wedding, what would you have done? Would you have had the courage to walk down that aisle knowing what you knew? Would you have confronted him publicly or handled it privately? Would you have called off the wedding entirely or done exactly what Emily did? And here's the harder question. If you had been one of the guests, one of the people who maybe suspected something was wrong but didn't want to get involved, would you have said something? If you had been Marcus, who saw Daniel with another woman months before the wedding, would you have told Emily? Or would you have convinced yourself it wasn't your business? These aren't easy questions. There are no perfect answers. But Emily's story reminds us that silence protects the wrong people. That sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is tell them a truth they don't want to hear. That being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are. Emily says now that she's grateful it happened when it did. That as painful as it was to have her wedding blow up in front of everyone, it would have been worse to marry someone who didn't love her. To spend years wondering why he was distant, why he was always on his phone, why she never quite felt secure. At least this way, she says, I know. I don't have to spend the rest of my life wondering if I made a mistake. The mistake was already made for me. And now I get a chance to start over. To find someone who actually wants to be with me. Someone who doesn't see commitment as a burden or marriage as a trap. Someone who chooses me every day, not just when it's convenient. So we're left with this. A bride who stopped her own wedding. A groom who thought he could have it all. And 200 witnesses who saw what happens when truth collides with pretense at the worst possible moment. Emily could have quietly called it off. She could have found out about the affair, cancelled the wedding, and dealt with it privately. Many people would have chosen that path. But she didn't. She chose to make Daniel face the consequences of his actions publicly, in front of everyone who mattered to both of them. Some people call that brave. Others call it vindictive. What do you think? Was Emily right to confront Daniel at the altar? Should she have handled it differently? And if you had been in her position, what would you have done? Would you have walked down the aisle at all? Would you have confronted him or just walked away? Would you have been able to stand in front of everyone you know and expose the truth, or would the humiliation have been too much? Think about the people in your own life. The relationships you're in or the ones you've left behind. Have you ever ignored red flags because you wanted so badly for something to work? Have you ever known someone was lying to you but convinced yourself you were wrong? Have you ever been the person who saw something wrong and stayed silent because it wasn't your place to say anything? Emily's story isn't just about a wedding. It's about trust, honesty, and the courage it takes to walk away from something that looks perfect on the outside but is rotten underneath. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to settle for less than you deserve, even when walking away is the hardest thing you've ever done. In the end, Emily chose herself. She chose truth over comfort. She chose a moment of public humiliation over a lifetime of private betrayal. And while the immediate aftermath was devastating, she's building a life now that's based on honesty instead of lies. A life where she doesn't have to wonder if the person next to her actually wants to be there. Daniel, wherever he is, will have to live with the fact that his deception didn't just end a relationship. It defined how hundreds of people will remember him forever. He'll always be the guy who got exposed at his own wedding. The guy who was so selfish that he was willing to marry someone he didn't love rather than face an uncomfortable conversation. Every relationship teaches us something. This one taught Emily that she's stronger than she thought. That she can survive the worst thing she could imagine happening. And that sometimes the best thing that can happen is for the truth to come out, no matter how painful it is at the time. What's the lesson here for the rest of us? Maybe it's to pay attention when something feels wrong. Maybe it's to speak up when we know someone is being lied to. Maybe it's to have the courage to ask hard questions even when we're afraid of the answers. Or maybe it's simply this. That love should never require you to ignore your instincts, accept disrespect, or settle for someone who sees you as an option rather than a priority. If this story made you think, if it moved you, if it reminded you of your own experiences with betrayal or courage, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? Have you ever had to walk away from something you wanted because you realized it wasn't good for you? What would you have done in Emily's place? And here's something you can help me with. My mom said I can't hit 1,000 subscribers before today ends. Subscribe and let's prove her wrong. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join this community of people who believe in truth, honesty, and having the courage to walk away when something isn't right. Because the more we share stories like Emily's, the more we remind each other that we deserve better. That we're worth more than lies and half-truths. That sometimes the bravest thing we can do is say no to something everyone else thinks we should say yes to. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves. And remember, you always deserve someone who chooses you fully, honestly, and without hesitation.